Why did Pope Francis, a man formed by centuries of sacred tradition and careful restraint, break down in tears for Gaza? What sorrow could cause a global spiritual leader to cry not behind closed doors, but in front of cameras with the entire world watching? And what if those tears, quiet, unplanned, unguarded, spoke louder than any sermon, protest, or peace accord ever could? A silence too heavy to bear. It began like any other official Vatican address. Pope Francis stood before the microphones, prepared to deliver another statement, another call for peace in a world that barely listens anymore. The hall was still. Cameras were focused. Journalists were ready to take notes. He looked down at his prepared remarks. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. His voice quivered. His hands trembled. And then, the unthinkable happened. The Pope of the Holy Father, head of the Roman Catholic Church, began to cry. He didn't hide it. He didn't turn away. He didn't try to explain. He bowed his head and wept. There was no orchestra in the background, no carefully curated moment. Just silence. A silence so thick, it pressed into the hearts of everyone present. And in that silence, something extraordinary emerged. Not a quote, not a doctrine, but a truth. A raw, sacred, human truth that didn't need explanation because it was already felt. In that moment, Pope Francis reminded us all that grief is not bound by theology, that compassion doesn't wait for approval, that sorrow, when real, is its own kind of prayer. And as his tears fell not for a doctrine, not for politics, but for Gaza, they became more than emotion. They became witness. What broke Pope Francis wasn't the weight of words, it was the images no one wanted to keep looking at. To most of the world, Gaza had become background noise, a place known more for conflict than for people. A name that flickers briefly across our screens before we scroll on. But he didn't scroll past. He lingered. He looked closer. And what he saw was unbearable. He didn't see sides. He didn't see policy. He didn't see strategy. He saw a baby, limp in a blood-stained blanket, carried by a father who no longer knew how to cry. He saw children digging through collapsed concrete, not for food, not for shelter, but for crayons. Because before their homes were destroyed, they were coloring. He saw a grandmother with 1,000 wrinkles of wisdom, now holding nothing but a photo, her only proof that someone she loved once existed. He saw silence, not the kind that brings peace, but the kind that follows explosions. That settles like dust in a child's lungs. That chokes any sense of hope. Francis didn't analyze. He didn't intellectualize. He didn't search for theological answers. He simply allowed himself to witness what so many had trained themselves not to see. And he wept. Not for a cause, not for a country, but for the raw, aching humanity buried beneath politics and rubble. He saw lives, stories, love, loss. He saw people real, breathing, precious people reduced to footnotes in a news cycle. And while the world argued about who started what, he mourned those who would never finish their childhood. He had seen the world from the highest seats of power, shaking hands with presidents, kings, and global figures whose names shape history. But in that moment, Pope Francis was not standing with rulers. He was standing with the forgotten. He was not in the halls of government. He was inside a cry, inside the ache of a people reduced to numbers. And he did not speak as the head of a global church. He spoke without speaking at Alice, a human being whose heart had cracked open. Because there comes a time when statements don't soften grief, when words fall flat against the weight of suffering, when speeches feel like noise and the only honest sound left is weeping. Pope Francis understood this. He didn't try to explain away the pain. He didn't dilute it with theology. He allowed it to break him publicly. And in a world addicted to distractions, where we move from one crisis to the next without truly feeling any of them, his tears became a holy interruption. They were not weakness. They were defiance. They were a refusal to normalize tragedy. A refusal to scroll past death. A refusal to pray with empty words. His tears said what doctrine could not. This pain is real. This grief is sacred. This moment demands present sano politics. They reminded us that compassion cannot always be composed. That sometimes the deepest empathy is raw, unscripted, and deeply, deeply human. The tears Pope Francis shed were not just for the bodies beneath the rubble. They were for the silence that followed. Because silence, in the face of suffering, does not comfort. It buries. It buries grief under indifference. It buries justice under excuses. It buries truth under the convenience of looking away. Francis wept not only for the children who never woke up, but for a world that continues to sleep through their cries. He cried because we've made tragedy ordinary. Because human suffering has become another scrollable moment background static beneath brighter screens. He cried because we explain, because we justify, because we analyze suffering until we've drained it of feeling. We count casualties like numbers on a spreadsheet and forget that behind each one was a story, a name, a future. And every time we choose comfort over discomfort, distance over closeness, distraction over conscience, something in us dies too. Francis's tears were not about politics. They were about humanity. His weeping revealed what we often try to ignore, that the greatest threat to compassion is not cruelty. It's numbness, not hatred, but apathy. And when a pope cries not for doctrine, not for image, but for the unbearable weight of indifference, it forces us to ask, what have we become if we can no longer cry with him? Most of us will never stand on the steps of the Vatican. We won't be handed a microphone in front of the world. We won't be asked to speak for the voiceless on an international stage. But that doesn't mean we're powerless. Because every day, we walk through a world filled with invisible Gaza moments. Moments of quiet collapse. Moments of silent grief. Moments when a soul cries out and waits to see if anyone notices. A nurse sits in her car after a 16-hour shift, holding back tears. A refugee holds a torn passport, unsure which border will close next. A friend sends a message that says, "I'm fine," while their heart is breaking. And in these small, quiet intersections of life, we are offered something sacred, a choice, to keep scrolling, to keep walking, to keep protecting our peace at the cost of someone else's plaskitis, or to pause, to see, to feel. Because compassion doesn't require a pulpit. It requires presence. It asks only that we stay awake, that we resist the pull toward numbness, that we choose not to look away, even when it would be easier to. Because that act of witnessing, a feeling of not turning away, was where our shared humanity begins to breathe again. It may seem small, but it's everything. It is the thread that holds the soul together. Pope Francis didn't rewrite a treaty that day. He didn't issue a new doctrine. He didn't change the headlines. But he changed something deeper, something quieter. He reminded us that we don't need power to be powerful, that sometimes the most radical thing we can do is feel fully, openly, inconveniently, In a world racing toward distraction, He gave us permission to pause, to let our hearts ache without needing a solution, to allow grief to wash over us without shame. Because compassion isn't weakness. It isn't optional. It's the last line of defense between our humanity and the numbness that threatens to erase it. So the next time you hear Gaza, don't scroll. Don't intellectualize. Don't move on. Pause. Let it pierce. Let it break something open. Because in a world that profits from your apathy, your empathy is rebellion. Your tenderness is resistance. Your tears show ever quieter. The beginning of something sacred. However, if this story stirred something in you, share it below. Your voice might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Subscribe to Mindful Way Television, ***, where we create space for stories that slow us down, wake us up, and open us wide. Don't stop here. Our next video travels even deeper into the overlooked corners of the human heart, the places we're told not to go, but must. Thank you for being part of this. Thank you for feeling. And always remember, you don't have to save the world, but don't let it make you forget how to feel it. ***.